In the story of Oedipus, we saw the dissolution of identity in Sophocles' play. Turning now to the Bacchae of Euripides, we're going to see another identity dissolve before our eyes. It's going to happen in a slightly different way, completely tied up with this figure of Dionysus. Dionysus is a god whose details we're going to discover in this play are fascinating inversions of normal ways that Greek gods are supposed to behave. He has another name, Dionysus and Bacchus. Both of them are equally Greek. Sometimes when we run into multiple names on the gods, one of them belonged to the Greeks, one to the Romans or someone else. But that's not the case. He's known as both Dionysus and Bacchus in the Greek material. He has a story behind him that is fascinating, complex, and interesting. He is indeed an Olympian god. He belongs. He's definitely one of them. He shows up early on in the tradition. Early mentions of Dionysus' name show up on pottery. We have attestations of him as a standard Greek god from as far back as we have attestations of any standard Greek god. But some of the things he does are a little strange, and in fact seem to be purposefully inverted examples of normal Greek custom and normal ways of worshiping the gods. Most Greek rituals happen out in the open, in broad daylight. We do them in public, in crowds, at very standard altars in large monumental temples. Animal sacrifice is performed. It's a carefully controlled killing of an animal. The animal is then cooked, carved up, and served out to people to be part of their healthy diet that they then eat. There's a very public aspect to these general components of the rites. Dionysian rites are the opposite in each of these times. Rather than being at daytime, they happen at night. Rather than being open and in broad daylight, they happen in secret. Rather than being in the center of the city, they happen in the hinterlands, and they're not at a main temple. They're in the hillsides, the crazy hillsides. Kithaeron is going to play another role when it comes to the Dionysian rites. We have a wild form of tracking down live animals and ripping them up with their bare hands, rather than the idea of controlled killing of the animal in a temple sacrifice. And then finally, eating the meat raw. This is what Dionysian celebrants do, rather than cooking it and eating it after it's been prepared. Dionysus and his rites seem so carefully to turn on its head each component of Greek sacrificial rite, the main component of Greek religious ceremonies. It seems as though Dionysus is actually built in as a inversion of what normally counts as Greek practice. Crucially important here, you see it in the vines and the little small grapes that are attached to them in the iconography around Dionysus, included in the wonderful ceramic behind us. Dionysus is a god of wine. You take this beautiful fruit over here and put it up with some special processes, blend it together, let it ferment for a while, and you get this beautiful drink over here. This drink tastes good. It tastes a little strange maybe at first, and after a while you might start to like it. And if you do, you get welcomed into another world. It's understood that Dionysian wine takes you from the world and the space that you're used to and puts you literally outside of yourself. There is an ecstatic component to being a Dionysian Dionysian reveler. Wine, yes, is going to be a part of many religious ceremonies in antiquity, but wine to extraordinary excess is characteristic of Dionysus. It is a sort of central part of what the Dionysian worship is all about. The idea of being not just tipsy, not even just plain drunk, but of being absolutely, completely gone drunk. That's a part of worshiping Dionysus. It's also a piece of the overturning of all the other normal components of Greek ritual that Dionysian ritual seems to involve. It is a consistent, though, piece of the Greek pantheon, as we were saying. Dionysus is pretty commonly looked at with some kind of strange eyes, even in the Greek materials that we're going to look at. He might be a foreign god. He might be a newcomer. They kind of wonder where it is that he came from. All of these, though, are to be built on top of what we think to be historically an indication that Dionysus is as old as any other Greek god. And he seems to have been from the very beginning always suspect. So he's that person in the family that has always been wondered about as to whether he actually is fully a part of the family. In the Bacchae, we're going to see some themes worked out, the same that are parallel to the kinds of themes we saw worked out in the Homeric hymns. There'll be reference to Dionysus' birth. He'll be trying to secure his place in the pantheon and find a stable position for himself. He's going to be busy involved in establishing his rights and making sure that human beings perform those rites for him. All of this is going to lend itself to a myth and ritual kind of analysis. We're going to see in the plays of Dionysus, or sorry, in the Bacchae by Euripides, we're going to see a welcoming of the particular tool that we have of myth and ritual that's going to claim that, again, myths are there in order to give a background story behind ritual activity that you and I normally do. It seems as though the Bacchae fits very well into this kind of template for understanding the myths and how they go. The background of Thebes is something that came up when we started to talk about Oedipus, and Thebes again shows up in the Bacchae. Interesting for us to take a moment here and just look a little bit more closely at this tradition. We mentioned last time Cadmus and his own connection, particularly the theme of autochthonous birth that shows up in his story, but there's a little bit more to it that we want to make sure we pull out. Thebes shows up in tragedies that survive from Athens, especially as a kind of mirror image of the Athens that Athenians like to imagine. The Athens of stability, the Athens of rationality, of clear-headedness, all of these things show up in the Athenian, in the drama set in Athens. When the Athenians talk about a strange place where things are a little bit off kilter, everything's a little bit off, they oftentimes are going to talk of Thebes. Thebes represents for them a place that has a deep background, an important mythic rootedness in the past, but when the Athenians spin it, they spin the stuff in the legends of Thebes that particularly looks odd, strange, and weird. There is a strong background in Cadmus's family of a certain kind of violence. Remember, Cadmus, we talked about in a previous lecture on Oedipus, was originally a Phoenician, and he winds up coming over to Greece because he's chasing his own sister, Europa. Europa's chasing after Zeus in the form of a bull, she falls in love with the bull and tries to make contact with that bull. Cadmus is on his way to try to find her when he runs into his serpent, kills the serpent, sows the dragon teeth. And recall, when those teeth go into the ground, the beings that sprout up, that become the founding families of Thebes, these humans all turn on each other and start to kill each other. Fratricidal violence shows up in Cadmus's family. Then Cadmus's daughters of Ino, Semele, Autonoe, and Agave each has a troubling story. Semele, some of you all will know, it's a very famous story, is actually the mother of Dionysus. So Dionysus is deeply connected with Thebes in his own family lineage. Yes, Dionysus has, on one hand, a mortal mother. When Semele, as the story famously goes, is impregnated by Zeus, she, through some trickery of Hera, insists that Zeus show himself to her in his full glory. When Zeus does, she is immolated. Zeus then snatches up the infant, and Dionysus is then born from Zeus's own thigh in a kind of male womb, taking over where a female womb started. So Zeus then gives birth to Dionysus a second time, and Dionysus then joins the pantheon. But poor Semele is immolated. In addition, to the daughter of Semele, there are the daughters of Autonoe and Ino. Autonoe, her son Actaeon, dies by being ripped apart by his own hunting dogs. A terrible, violent death that shows up also in the family of Cadmus. Ino also dies. She dies herself by plunging into the sea with her own son in her arms when her husband turns in a frenzy and chases her down and tries to kill her. So there's awful things percolating in Cadmus's family. Agave, whose story we're going to see in Euripides' Bacchae, has a terrible, terrible version of things happen to her too. Each of these installments shows us that Cadmus's family is visited, infected with this kind of violence in a way that it's not quite like the house of Atreus, where that violence is constantly turning in on itself and unable to heal itself. Instead, it just seems that awful things, seemingly at random, continuously visit this poor family, and each of them has an important connection with this figure of Bacchus, or Dionysus, whose story we'll talk about next.